Howdy, and welcome back to You've Got People Problems, the podcast where we tackle the leadership challenges that no one wants to talk about, but every business faces. I'm your host, Melissa Ortiz with Activate Human Capital Group, and this is episode 28. Today we're talking about what it takes to step into a new organization and quickly chart a path forward with my guest, Mike Drolet. Mike is COO at 6 Degrees and has spent nearly 2 decades leading private equity-backed companies through growth and transformation. He's known for parachuting into a business, assessing the lay of the land, and helping them move from good to great, often on a global scale. At the center of Mike's approach is always people. His playbook begins with understanding who's on the team, what they do, whether they have clarity, and how to ensure they're positioned to succeed. From there, it's about aligning investor expectations with practical execution and moving at a pace that drives results without losing the culture. If you've ever faced the challenges of leading a high-stakes, fast-changing environment, this episode will give you insights you can apply the next time you're asked to lead through change. Let's get to it. Howdy, y'all, and welcome to You've Got People Problems. This episode is featuring someone that is new to me and incredibly impressive as a leader. His name is Mike Drolet, and he is with 6 Degrees. And the conversation we had leading up to this to me was so exciting, just in the way that he has an ability to kind of parachute into a new organization, get the lay of the land quickly, and he's someone I think we can all learn a lot from. So Mike, thank you for being with us, and give us a little spiel about yourself and the organization. I'd love to learn more.
Well, first, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm certainly happy to share some of the lessons along the way. For the majority of the last 15, almost 20 years now, worked in the world of private equity. I'm not a finance guy, I'm an operations guy. So typically walk into an environment where the private equity investor group says, hey, we've got something good, we want to make it really great. We've got something that's good in this market, we want to make it global. So there's always change as the mandate coming into that scenario. And a lot of that, then the first thing that I focus on is, okay, who are our people? Who do we have? Where are they? What do they do? Do they know what they should be doing? Are they good at what they do? That's usually the first step in my playbook, is to understand our people and where they are and what they're doing. So again, in my world, I've had the opportunity this is my 5th experience with 6 Degrees, walking into an organization, understanding the lay of the land, working with our investor group. Here's the mandate. Here's what we want to achieve. How quickly can we get there? And we have to move at pace.
And with managed services, this is a template that's been used worldwide to help IT companies manage their infrastructure, their tools, even their hardware, right? That's
correct. So specifically in this environment for 6 Degrees, our customer base is mid to larger size organizations, government entities, organizations who need the latest, greatest technology. That could be network connectivity, that could be cloud, that could be security, various things. Typically organizations that are not large enough to have a massive information technology group themselves. They need a partner to help them with the latest technology, oftentimes helping them on the journey of their technology. How do we move forward and stay nimble, stay current? We're that provider, and work from individual projects where we may assist in one area up to we essentially are the entire information technology department for that organization, and a bit of every flavor in between.
great. Great. So I think the thing that was most compelling to me in speaking with you, Mike, was your experiences coming in from the outside at a leadership level, and your natural orientation towards how do I get the lay of the land. I'd love for you to lay that out for us, because there was just so much gold there that I think we can all learn from, even if we're just dropping into, say, a new nonprofit that we're working with, or a new division, or lots of different areas of our lives.
Certainly. So again, by the nature of where the industry in which I work, pace of change is always required. And so as it relates to people and working with people, I've always found you've got to be very careful in that balancing act. Meaning, I walk into an environment, we have to assess quickly, understand quickly, and move forward quickly. That also means, though, we need to be right. And that presents the challenge. As it relates to people, if I put on the hat of kind of I'm a human as well, you want to give people the chance. You want to make sure you understand. You want to make sure that you really dig into the details to know what are they doing? Are they doing it well? Are they aligned with the strategy of the organization? But also, you have to accept that we have to move at pace, meaning that I often, as chief operating officer, don't have the luxury to say, okay, I can sit here for the next 6 months. I'm going to interact with the team. I'm going to watch what they do. I'm going to see how the organization performs. That's typically not a luxury I am ever afforded. It's okay, how quickly can I determine what's truth, separating fact from fiction, separating how capable are we, how do we act in terms of capabilities aligned to our strategy, where do we have gaps in our organization, and trying to do that very quickly, but also making sure that you're being fair and that you're understanding, again, that fact and not fiction. And that presents a challenge.
So you talked a lot about pace of change. I read something years ago that really resonated with me, and it was talking about the fact that we're in an economy where it isn't about change management anymore. It's really about change readiness. How do you gauge an organization's ability to take on the level of change they're going to need to keep up the pace that you're talking about?
So when I talk to the board of directors or our investor groups, one of the first things that I always talk about in the first thing out of my playbook is I have to assess what is the pace of change that this organization can accept, meaning how quickly can they move. And so certain organizations, there was a particular organization I was with previously, it was obvious to me very quickly that we've got a lot of effort to do to enact change. A separate organization and where I am now, typically technology organizations, changes in the DNA. This is what we do by the nature of that industry. And so really the first thing is assessing how nimble is that organization? How much change can we push on them before we break the organization? What I often find is that typically your A players in your organization, very often when a new organization, a new COO or a new executive team comes in, the A players are often going, this is fantastic. I've been beating my head against this wall. I can tell you the 7 things that are broken. I can show you where we have problems. I can't wait to get started. Let's move, let's change, let's get on with it. And
Here are my
that
10
is very
ideas of how we
exciting.
should do that.
Absolutely. You also then, if you look at the other spectrum, you have individuals who are afraid. Wait a second, I'm comfortable in what I do. I know what I do. I do it every day. I do it the same way. I don't want change. I don't like change. This feels very uncomfortable to me. And so, as a leader, what I found is that you have to be able to adapt to that audience, but more specifically, that individual. And I worked for a CEO years ago who taught me the phrase, some days you have to know which cape to put on. So I often, especially in a new environment, sometimes I'll think of myself as the superhero, right? Okay, if I'm sitting down with a legacy organization who is very set in their ways, very process driven, very rigorous, I need to pull out a cape that minimizes a little bit of fear, minimizes the pace of change, maybe tones down the language a little bit, recognizing the audience and saying, okay, I understand we're going to be careful as we make change. We're going to work together. You're going to have a voice. You're going to help us understand what we need to do and how we need to go about it. Again, on the other side, then the other cape sometime with the superheroes, it's these are a fast-paced group of individuals who are just raring to go. And I often find myself having to say, wait, hold on a second. We need to change. We need to do it quickly. We can't break things along the way. Or as much as we can, let's know what we're going to break and have a plan as we do it. So for me, it's often very quickly understanding who is the team, even who are the individuals, how do they need to understand what we're trying to do? Because at the end of the day, regardless of the starting point, regardless of where that individual or where that team is in that journey, we still have to get them all to the same place.
I love that. One of our core values at Activate is meet them where they are. And putting on the right cape sounds a lot like meet them where they are. It's like if they are coming from a place of fear, we have to give them some certainty and some knowledge. We're not just going to absolutely bomb everything around here. But the people who are ready to blow it up anyway, we've got to help figure out, okay, what barriers can we remove and how do we prioritize? And it's the same
I
goal.
agree. And I think the thing that I've learned is that the way that you have to do that is you have to ground it in truth. Meaning, as the leader, you have to be truthful about where we're going. So if you want to use the analogy of the bus, I'm here in London, the big red double-decker buses, people can picture that in their head. I feel like walking into a new environment where we know we're going to be making change, my obligation as the leader is to say, I will be very clear with you, this is where the bus is going. You can see the route. I can show you the map. I can walk you through how we're going to get there. This is where we're headed. That's an obligation of a good leader, is to be able to very clearly show this is where the bus is headed. And then also accept, and I say this openly, the first opportunity I get in an all hands forum with the entire company, with the group, is to say, it is okay if you don't want to be on that bus. That is all right. I would much rather you say, raise your hand and say, you know what, for whatever reason, this is not the bus that I want to be on. That is okay. Because what we will do is we will, to continue with the analogy, we will help you gracefully exit at the next stop. That is okay. This is coming in with the expectation that the change in the organization, where we're going to go, assuming that everybody is going to love that idea, that everybody is going to be bought into that strategy, you're kidding yourself. And so what I've learned is you have to be honest with yourself and realize that no matter how great of a presenter you are, no matter how brilliant your strategy is, not 100% are going to buy into that, and you have to be willing to accept it. And what I've found is it is much easier to create a safe environment for individuals to say, you know what, I'm not sure this is for me for whatever reason, and then say, you know what, that is okay. And if I look at it again, we're all humans. I feel like my first responsibility is to that individual to say, you know what, we spend so much time at our work and our career. If you're not happy here for whatever reason, you should do something else. Of course, I would like it to be with us at our organization. If it's not, that is okay. I would much rather help you gracefully get off at the next stop and go to the next organization or the next move in your career where you're going to be happy. And so I think being able to move forward and change and do it quickly, you have to be honest both with yourself, with your teams, and you have to be transparent about it and be open with this is where we're going. And it's okay if you're not bought into that.
So I can't tell you how deeply that whole segment resonates with me. The last 18 years of my life have really been dedicated to getting the right people in the right seats on buses, and not so much from a recruiting perspective, but thinking about our internal resources and understanding, like you were saying, who do we have? What makes them tick? And if they aren't going to be happy on this bus, it doesn't do us as an organization, them as individuals, or our customers any good to have them there. They're just wasting their life energy by trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. And so as I'm thinking about you
Absolutely.
talking about the grounded in truth segment, I'm thinking about systems, what systems might change, what strategy is likely to change, what staffing levels might change, and in what areas. And God, that's got to be so much easier said than done when you're thinking about people's livelihoods.
It is. And I think what you just said at the end there, that's what you have to do to be a good leader. This is people's livelihoods. Yes, I can talk about this process is inefficient. Here are the steps that we need to change. Here's a new map to that process. We can do that all day long. At the end of the day, to that individual, this is what I get up and do in the morning and where I go and how I support my family and how I move forward with my life. That's the most important thing. So regardless of your brilliant technology, regardless of your process mapping, regardless of your strategy, you've got to accept that this is really important to each individual. And so again, being honest and being open and being truthful with them, that's how you get that buy-in. And I think the other piece to that is you have to be transparent as a leader. So for me, again, going back to my playbook, how do I move forward quickly in these organizations? Within the first 3, 5 days, sitting down with an organization, as I listen, as I meet with people, I'm looking for things that I know from experience. I can change that and I can do it quickly. So whether I write it down, whether I keep it in my head, I'm identifying things when I speak with an individual. And then I take that week 2, week 3, as we work through, I make sure that I go and make that change or take that action or make an effort to do something that I committed to, specifically to have that example to go back to that individual one-on-one and say, hey, you remember that conversation we had and you told me that this element was a problem? Here's what I went and did about that. And that individual goes, what I often find, wow, Mike actually listened to me. He heard me and he showed that he's willing to do something about it. And what I find is it's kind of like that snowball effect. One of those, two of those, four of those, six, seven of those, that information, people talk, right? And they share with their friends over lunch or over a cup of coffee in the morning. You know what? Mike came and asked me about something, and then he went and did something about it, and I see it. And you know what? I believe in that, and that is how you demonstrate. I often also talk about you can make brilliant PowerPoint slides. You can put great words up there, pretty pictures. That really doesn't matter. What matters to people is that you did what you said you were going to do. And so for me, I find knowing that I'm walking into an environment where we need to make change quickly, I have to establish credibility. The best way to do that, I do what I said I was going to do. So specifically finding those opportunities and where I know I can demonstrate that quickly, and then moving forward, month two, month three, month six, still making sure that I do not ever commit to something that I know I can't achieve. So if I tell someone that, hey, I heard you, I am going to do something about this, I'm going to take that action, we're going to make that change, you have to do it. That's how you build trust and how you build credibility. That's how you get people to buy into the strategy and the vision and where that bus is going. It's not the slides that you put in the PowerPoint.
That's interesting. That really dovetails nicely, Mike, with the work that I do around measuring employee engagement. So for almost 2 decades, I've been helping organizations take the pulse on morale and figure out where are their hot spots, where are their unmet employee needs. And one of the things we find is these categories of employees. You talk about a bus, I think a lot about a rowboat. And we've got fully engaged employees who are rowing in the right direction. They're encouraging their peers. You've got engaged employees who are they're doing the work. They're maybe not as enthusiastic cheerleaders, but they're there consistently doing good work. We've got our not engaged folks who of late we've called them quiet quitters. They're kind of asleep in the boat. And then you've got your actively disengaged folks in the back, and they're dragging their oars and they're throwing us off course and they're making snide remarks to their peers. One of the things I think that's fascinating that you were describing was if we get someone who's been frustrated about an issue and no one's been able to hear them, and suddenly someone like you comes in and says, you're right, that sucks. That's not working. We need to fix that. They go fix it. All of a sudden we can take someone who was toxic, angry, and frustrated and go, whoa, maybe it isn't quite what I thought it was here. And we can flip these people all the way to a fully engaged bucket because they have this emotional intensity around the business that our quiet quitters, are not engaged folks, they have apathy. But it's really interesting to see how that works. And I'm curious if you've seen some of those kind of, I don't know, people that people warned you about in the organization. You're like, well, they're not
Yes.
wrong. What if we fix this?
That's right. I absolutely have. And I find for me, what's most important is that I sit down with every level of individual in our organization. And I find it fun, even in the first couple of weeks in a new environment. So in this environment, I'll sit down with literally our service desk engineers who are looking at the big screen. We have this ticket, this alert, something we need to fix. And I literally will sit down with them at their desk, at their cube, and talk to them. And at first, it's apprehension. Well, why is this brand new chief operating officer coming and sitting next to me and wanting to know what I do? That fear of, is he trying to see what I do so he can get rid of me? The answer is no, I genuinely want to see what you do and why. And when you engage with individuals, even if it's at the most granular level, why did you type in that command to do that function? Why did it take you 8 steps to get that thing resolved? When you start asking, what I find, people have been wanting to share. They know, and the people who are on the front lines of the organization, they know what's broken. They know what's inefficient. They know where the problems are. It's a matter of, and I see this as probably one of the bigger missed opportunities when I look back over my career before I got to the role that I'm in. People would never come and ask. And sitting down with individuals and getting that level of detail helps me as a leader to truly understand, okay, this is really where the problems are. This is where we need to fix. And so what I find is beneficial, I know where at the high level where we want to work as a strategy. With my partners on the executive team, we have the strategy, we've crafted it, we know where we want to go. The details of, okay, so how are we going to get there? What needs to change? What do we need to do differently? the best place to inform that information is sitting with the people who do it. And it sounds really simple. However, what I find is it doesn't happen. I can tell you in a previous organization, I lost track of the number of times I sat down with somebody and said, this problem that we're having right here, were we not smart enough to see that this was going to be the bad outcome? Like if when we made this decision back here, did we not realize this was what was going to happen? I lost track of the number of times I was given the answer. Mike, no, nobody came and asked me. And what I've learned then is, as an executive, you cannot sit in the conference room or sit in your office, think through stuff and decide this is what we need to do. I'm going to go change it without talking to the people whose fingers are on the keyboard or whose
Or
hands
running the
are
play.
on the equipment or whatever scenario that is, talking to them. And I will openly admit many times I have sat in a conference room with my peers. We map out, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to go about it. I'll go start talking to people on the floor or in the war room or wherever it is. And I'll walk out going, that thing we thought we were going to do, that's not going to work because I talk to the people who know and they inform me of something. And so one of the biggest lessons I've learned in doing this is it is completely worth the time and effort that I take to carve out of my day to go sit with an individual for 20 minutes, for an hour, for whatever it takes, and as many individuals as it takes. I learned so much more that helps us as an executive team inform our strategy. And then that is how we get back to our ability to move at pace and the ability of change and pace of change that an organization can withstand. We can do it much more effectively when we take our strategy, we talk to the people who do the work, we put the two together. That allows us to move forward very quickly in making change and making things better. And back to your point, what I often find is those individuals who previously sat there with their arms crossed and said, I want no part of this. This is all wrong. Those guys don't know what they're doing. They don't understand. You take that away, right? Well, help me understand. I'll sit with you at your desk. Help me understand.
Right.
What is it that I don't know? What is it that I'm assuming that's incorrect? Ask them. And oftentimes, what you said, they're right. That they know because they live it. They know what has been frustrating. And if you learn that, I get two things from that. One, I know what we really need to focus on. And two, I've demonstrated to somebody that I will listen. And I get the next time the arms are crossed a little bit less. And over time, maybe they start to lean forward in the conversation. Maybe they start to engage a bit more and say, you know what? I actually want to be part of this change process. I want to help make things better. I don't really just want to sit in the rowboat and detract and complain and say everything is
Nobody
broken.
wants that. Nobody wants to be in that seat. It's miserable for them. It's miserable for everyone around them. And they know the way that they're looked at by their peers. But it's just so interesting. They can't help themselves sometimes because they've usually tried at some point to share the information and been shut down, either by hierarchy or peers or any number of reasons. I think so. My husband owned an MSP. I've worked with several managed service providers as clients. And one of the things I think that's my favorite thing about this space is, especially in IT, all these people tell me continuously, we're lazy. We want to find the simplest, quickest way to do things, the fewest keystrokes. And
Yes.
that's what very hallmark of our younger generations in the workforce too. And if we can play to that and we can meet them where they are and continually identify these quick wins, it's like, you're right. There was an easier way to do that and celebrating that rather than complaining that they don't want to do the work. Well, because they think the work is stupid because they could do it in 4 steps when we're trying to make them do it in 9. And
Exactly. And then to take that point, if you're the senior leader, why would you not want them to do it in 4 instead of 9? Of course you would, right? And so to your point, I find that very frequently that when I ask, well, why the why? Why do we do the 9 steps? Why do we not do 4? Why do we take the time to do 9? The answer is, well, that's how we've done it. Okay, well, let's change that. And I often get a little bit of the wide-eyed look. You mean we can just go change that? Yes. And when you empower people to say, yes, absolutely, go change that, go make that better, start doing it in 4 steps instead of 9. Again, you've made the organization more efficient. And now you've bought yourself another supporter who's like, wow, this is getting better. I see why I want to be part of this.
And as much as there are some people in our population, when you think about you, I'm going to go back to one of the first things you said about figuring out who they are. Who are these humans who work here? Some people really don't like public recognition, but there isn't a single person in an organization when you say, Jennifer had this a fantastic idea. We went and did it. This is the impact. She may be shy and she may not like the public attention, but you better believe the pride in that person and the people around her go, yeah, she's really good. And that
Absolutely. And I think I agree with you. And I think finding those opportunities to celebrate those ideas, the best leaders that I've worked for personally and the ones that I try to emulate are the ones who say, you know what? That wasn't my idea. That was Jennifer's idea. That was this person's idea. And giving them that credit and that recognition. And you're right. Oftentimes they don't want the spotlight shown directly on them. However, that sense of pride and that knowledge of, yes, I helped contribute, that goes a long way. And then the other thing to that is that spreads, right? People talk, right? They're friends in the organization over coffee in the morning, over lunch, over drinks at the end of the day. That starts to spread very rapidly that, hey, you know what? Not just Jennifer had a really smart idea that was implemented, but the organization listened to Jennifer and said, hey, that's smart. And they did something with it. That buy-in generates credibility and again helps you start to get those people who were detractors or sitting in the boat, not helping, however you want to describe it, starts to get them to say, well, if everybody else is contributing and buying in and we're seeing the positive momentum, why would I not want to be a part of that? And you see that buy-in from those people who previously weren't.
okay, the topic of this podcast is you've got people problems. These are a lot of people solutions. Talk to me about some of the barriers you run into as you're trying to amp up the pace of change, improve organizational results. Where do you see people barriers that you run into?
I see a few. So you're going to have, in every scenario I've been in, you're going to have your population that is comfortable doing it the way it's been done, not open to change, doesn't want to do it differently, doesn't see the need to do it differently. And again, I go back to what I've learned the best solution there is you have to be honest, right? So I've seen bad scenarios with leaders who will come in and try to be empathetic and let's hide the fact that we're going to make a change. Let's just let them feel like they can live in their comfort zone. I look at it the opposite way. If I know we're going to have to change as an organization, me hiding that, me letting that individual feel like we're going to let them sit in that comfortable bubble, that's not good for them. That's not good for us. And so
There's
for
probably
those,
nothing
I
there.
think as a leader, yes, as a leader, you have to be willing to take certain things head on and say, you know what, if this is going to be a problem, let's sit down, let's talk about it, let's get it out in the air and let's move forward. And one of the things that I will say this to an entire organization, but also very specifically to that group that says that resistance to change. What I do is I tell them, look, I cannot promise you that you'll always like what I have to tell you, but what I can promise you is that I'll tell you the truth. And the truth is here, we're going to have to change and we're going to have to do this differently, whatever that scenario is for that particular group. And they may not like it. They may not want to buy into it, but I've at least told them the truth and they know, and now we can move on. And so back to the people problem thing, then you start to allow yourself in a fair way to say, okay, I was transparent with you about new expectations, whether that's a role, whether that's reporting, whether that's whatever metric we're using. I was clear in what the expectations are, how those expectations are now different than what they were. And now, if you're unwilling to get there or unable or just flat don't want to, now I have a fair and equitable baseline to say, okay, now we have to have a different conversation. And that's another element where, again, if you want to be a leader, you have to be willing to have those hard conversations and say, let me walk you through the steps. Let me tell you how we got here. And now we may be in a situation where we have to have a conversation about this is probably not the best bus for you to be on. So let's talk about how we exit you from this bus at the next stop. And so I often find, and again, I generally never have this luxury to say, okay, I know there's a problem area. I'm just going to let that sit and I'm going to go focus elsewhere and I'll get back to it. That is a recipe for disaster. That will never end well. You have to be willing to say, okay, if I know this is going to be a problem area, whether it's one individual, whether it's a team, whether it's a group, whether it's an office location, whatever that dynamic is, if you're not willing to address it, you're not going to be successful. And so that's the other piece that I've found is that you've got to be willing to take those hard cases head on, sit down, be fair, be equitable, treat everybody the same, but you have to be willing to say, this is what the expectation is. If that expectation is not met, we'll have a different conversation, and we have to do that quickly.
I think the thing that resonates with me as I pull all that together is this concept that I've used with employees. It's yours to lose. Here's where we're at. You get to choose if you want to meet this bar or if that just doesn't work for you, because sometimes we don't have the aptitude and sometimes we don't
Correct.
have the will, and either one is okay. But as long as I know what bar I'm striving for, then I know, am I going to clear it or not? And
I agree. And I think, back to your question of people problems, and I'll tie it back to the point you just made. Another people problem that I often find is this is a willing individual who gets up in the morning and says, I want to do my best. They've been placed in a role that they're not going to succeed, either because they don't have the skills, they don't have the experience, they don't have the aptitude. But you find those cases where almost through no fault of that person, they were placed in a role that is not going to be successful. So again, as a leader, ignoring that, hiding that, pretending that it's somehow going to get better, that's not doing that individual any good. That's not doing the organization any good. So in those cases, again, fairness, transparency, sitting down and having the conversation to say, hey, let's revisit the expectations of this role. This is what they are. Your performance is here. It's not a judgment. It's not a failure. It's that the expectations are here. Performance is here. We've got the gap. And so let's talk about that. What I find is when you have that honest conversation, oftentimes you'll get that individual who says, you know what, this isn't really the job I wanted to do anyway. And I was asked to do it. Somebody else left. I had to fill in. Like you have all the reasons for why someone wound up in that position. And they say, you know what, this is really not what I want to do. And oftentimes they know they're struggling. They know that the expectations are out further in front. And when you stop and say, okay, how do we address that? Is there another role in the organization that would be a better fit for you? Or would you like, in the technical world, maybe there are courses or technology training or things that we could do to increase your skill set, whatever that path may be, or having an honest dialogue back to the beginning to say, you know what, this may just not be the right fit. And I would much rather, as a human, work with you to find the right fit, even if that means the right fit is with a different company, a different organization, than trying to have you sit here and be unhappy and us be unsuccessful as a company. I'd rather have the right conversation, get that person to the right place, even if that's somewhere other than our organization.
okay, there's so much here. I feel like we should be doing this at least 2 hours, but we don't have that much time. So a couple of things that came to the surface for me as you were talking that really resonated with my experience. One was around imposter syndrome. My working hypothesis for a long time has been, and I've seen it in the data because I do a lot of fit to role measurements and a lot of employee engagement measurements. Those are the core aspects of my business. And what I see is when I have strong fit to role, there's near zero imposter syndrome because they're very comfortable in their own shoes. They're comfortable asking questions. They don't hoard information. But when you have someone who's a weak fit to role, like you were saying, somebody asked me to do this. They went on maternity leave and never came back. And then I had this job, but this wasn't my job. And they have massive levels of imposter syndrome because they know they don't have the aptitude. So what they cover up with is lots of extra skills and specialized knowledge and keeping information close to the vest because they don't want anyone to find out that they're not really meant for that seat. And so it's amazing as we start to decouple those, how you can. I had a client tell me one time that he was repotting people. He was putting them in the right pots with the right amount of sunlight and the right amount of water, the right size pot. And I thought, I'm a farm girl, so that resonated with me in my heart. But like this idea that maybe you're meant to be in this bus, but you're in the wrong seat. And how can we honor the aptitudes you have? Because gosh, you do realize you've got some real, like you're great at telling the world about our organization. Why are you not in marketing? Why are you in this seat? So if we can start measuring and placing those people, that starts to garner a lot of trust. within the organization.
I agree. And I keep coming back to it because I so often see that it gets missed in the business world. It's just being open and honest with individuals and being willing to have that conversation to say, look, this isn't working for you. This isn't working for us. Let's talk about a better solution. Let's look at, what is it that you're interested in? What is it that your strengths are? Let's have that open dialogue. I can tell you, I really don't know that I've ever met anybody who gets up in the morning and says, you know what? I want to go to work today and I just want to be okay-ish. No, no, everybody wants to do their best, right? And so oftentimes as a leader, stopping to ask the question, what is it where you would be best? What are those skills? To your point, maybe it is in marketing, maybe it is in a different group of the organization, maybe it is something completely different. And oftentimes when I've done that, you'll get the response, Mike, nobody came and asked me. And so sitting down and having those conversations, and I say that, and I will preface this with, there has to be an element of pragmatism to it, right? To think that, hey, when we're going to make change in the organization, that I can move every single individual around and find them a different seat on the bus. You have to be realistic as well, right? And that also then gets to, as you start to move those pieces, there are going to be places where you say, you know what, there isn't that right seat here, and you have to be willing to be upfront with people. Knowing, the worst thing as an individual in an organization that is experiencing change is to sit there every day and come to work and say, you know what, I'm trying my best. And I'm just waiting for somebody to come tap me on the shoulder and say, we need to have a conversation. That is the worst possible environment for somebody to be in. And so where you can identify that and have that conversation, again, I go back to, I can't promise you're always going to like what I have to tell you, but I'm going to be truthful and honest with you. Having that oftentimes, and I've run into it in every organization I've had somebody come back to me and say, you know what, Mike, I didn't like being told that I was not going to be a fit for this organization going forward. But what I appreciate is you were honest with me and you told me the truth, and I can live with that. And so that's the difference. And again, I find that gets overlooked and missed so often. People just want to be told the truth, even if it's bad news.
Rip off the band-aid. No, but the uncertainty is such a killer for people because my mantra that goes right along with yours is nobody wants to suck at work. No one shows up at work
Right.
every day. I'm gonna suck at my job.
Right.
Nobody, nobody does that.
Right.
So ripping off the band-aid, one of the phrases I use is deal direct. Just tell me what it's going to be if
That's
you
right.
know. If you don't, say, I don't know yet, but I'm hoping to have a plan by next Tuesday. Okay, people can live with these segments of time, but what they can't live with is this looming cloud, just like you're saying, waiting to be tapped on the shoulder, like, oh, hey, by the way, I think it's over. And they're like,
Right.
I knew that 6 weeks ago.
Exactly.
Getting away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I find from an organizational perspective, in the bigger scheme, you're able to move forward. So back to pace of change, that lets the organization itself move forward by dealing with those cases where you need to, whether it's an individual, whether it's a team, whether it's an office, whatever that scenario is, the quicker that we all own up to it and say, this is the conversation we need to have, here's the outcome, and here's how we're going to go about it. It allows us then to move to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. That's that pace of change. And so I think, again, and also I'll go back to part of this is the environment that I work in. If a company was humming along perfectly and everything was great, they wouldn't have needed to make a change in the first place, right? So I always walk into a scenario where I know, okay, things are going to need to change, and we're going to need, again, we've got something good, we want to make it great. Something needs to be different. Accepting that and walking in and saying, okay, individual teams, as we make that change, here's how we're going to do it. This is the pace of change that we have. Pretending that there's, putting on the blinder and pretending I know there's something over there, but if I don't look at it, perhaps it'll solve itself on its own. That is a recipe for disaster. And that's often an environment that I walk into, which is this thing has been a problem for a while and it's been ignored. It's been hoped for that it would change and it hasn't. Again, it all comes down to people. And I find when you go talk to the individuals, back to the people with fingers on the keyboards, hands on the packages, whatever the environment is, they knew that thing was a problem for the last 2 years. It's not a surprise. It's
They
not,
just didn't have the authority to take care of it.
exactly. And so again, this does two things. One, I find you acknowledge it and you deal with it. So people are wow, okay, finally somebody came in and did it. And then you get the second benefit, which is somebody finally listened. I've been beating my head against the wall, and now you've got a supporter who's bought into your vision, how you're moving forward, how you want to go. And they say, you know what? I see individuals doing the right thing. They tell me they're going to make a change. They make a change. Even if I don't agree with it, I see that they're good to their word. They do what they tell us. That's important. I want to be in an environment where I feel like I know what's going on. I believe my leaders. When they tell me they do something, I see the follow through. Most people, again, to your point, I don't want to be suckish at my job. I want to be good. And most people, when they look at, I want to be good in an environment that I see is doing the things that they tell me are going to happen. That's where most people want to succeed.
And I will point out a third tertiary benefit as we think about, you did something about it. Thank God, it's been a while. The third thing, what I consistently see, especially when the situation is what I call productive jerks, they're really effective leaders that it's an at what cost. They're wreaking havoc on the organization, but
Yes,
their metrics are good. So we kind of turn a blind eye. What I
correct.
see is when we deal with that issue, the upswell of support of how can I help? Where can I fill in? This is what I can do. This is
Yes,
what I can to make sure the organization keeps going is overwhelming because it's a gratitude. I call it better engagement through attrition. When we take out a toxic player, usually it's in sales or
yes.
operations is where they live because they have metrics tied to them and they're able to prove their worth, but it's very hard to quantify the cost of getting that value. And that's what people see with their fingers on the keyboard. Like that guy's a jerk.
Correct. And I think the other piece there, back to, people problems. One, you have to be willing to identify those and take those head on, right? Again, as you say, ignoring it's not going to make the problem go away. But I think the added piece, right, that you have to be willing to accept is, yes, we have metrics, we have performance reviews, we have those tactical measurement things that we use. There's also culture. There's also being a team player. There's also the ability to get along and work with your peers. And I think that's another element that I often see that gets ignored. It's this acceptance of, well, we'll tolerate bad behavior because that person's really good at what they do. That can only go so far, right? And what I've seen, exactly what you described, what I've seen without fail, I could not give you an example where I've seen it otherwise. When you're willing to say, you know what, I know that is knowledge that is going to walk out the door, but I'm willing to accept that because it's such a toxic cultural defeatist attitude that we need to remove from our organization. Once you do that, the rest of that build back, as you say, much better. And now you have people who were quietly sitting in the corner, not doing their best because maybe that person was a manager, maybe that person had influence elsewhere. Then you start to see the rest of the people who were willing to just sort of ignore and not be bought in. Now they want to be bought in because you remove the pain point. And that's hard to do. And I get it, because yes, in often cases, those are people who have been with the organization for a long time. They know a lot about what we do. They've maybe worked in all areas of the business, so they have a lot of that knowledge. That's tough, right? And that's why that situation is often allowed to linger because leaders are not willing to take that hard step to say, I'm going to pull off this band-aid. I'm going to accept that there's going to be some short-term pain, but I am thinking far enough ahead that I know we will, as an organization, be at a better place once I make that change.
This is amazing. Mike, your playbook is clearly tried and true. I've learned a lot in this discussion. Here are a couple of tips and tricks. I try to always wrap these discussions with, okay, what are some things we could take back to our own environments that might be beneficial from listening to this conversation? So one of the things you started with was just who are these people? What do they do? Are they working on the right things and really have clarity around what their roles and responsibilities are? You talked about the pace of change and really looking for people who are ready for change, who tend to be the A players, because I've experienced that time and time again. They're hungry versus resistant. And I loved the way you phrased it, knowing which cape to put on. How do we meet them where they are, assuage their concerns while still maintaining that absolute candor and dealing with issues head on? Because if we don't do that, it's really hard to earn trust if we're waffling or stalling or um, and then another thing that I really was thinking a lot about was identifying these quick wins, sitting with frontline people who see our client interactions, who see the operations firsthand, and how do we find some small things that they can go, wow, I've been dealing with that for X amount of time and like magic, it could be fixed. Okay, there might be something here that I really want to lean into.
Correct.
So what else came out of this discussion for you that resonated that you think we
I,
should run with?
I think if I put all of that together, if I had to sum it up in one piece, as a leader, you've got to be authentic. And you can read that in books and you can hear that, and that's great. I put that back in the bucket of you can put whatever you want on a pretty slide. It doesn't matter. If you don't practice that, if you don't demonstrate that to people, that that is the difference. You have to be authentic. And if I'm going to sit with someone for 20 minutes at the keyboard, I have to be engaged. I have to ask because I should be willing to learn. But I will tell you, if you're not willing to actually invest and make the time to do it well, it's often worse. You should probably not do it at all. So the point being, you've got to be authentic when you do this, and you've got to be authentic and be truthful when you say that problem, I'm going to go change that. And you better be sure you can do that because that's the credibility factor. And again, and we talk about this in my current organization, we don't talk about, hey, we are going to massively change things overnight. We talk about incremental steps, one step, one step. Did we do this thing a little bit better than we did it last time? Okay. Was this week a little bit of better performance than last week? Okay. And so the same thing in dealing with individuals. If I can solve one problem for one person, you might say, well, that's great. That's one of 1,000. Well, that's one. And then I got a two and then a three. And it before long, over 4 weeks, 6 weeks, those numbers start to pile up and you get the multiplier effect because all those people talk and they say, you know what? Mike came in, he sat with me, he told me he was going to do something and he did it. I can buy into that. That's the piece. You have to be authentic.
So that word authentic, I think, is so important because I can't be your type of authentic. You can't be my type of authentic. And I think it's a
Correct.
scary thing to enter the waters, especially if we've looked to really strong mentors in our careers. Like, wow, I want to be like that guy, or she was really amazing. We can't ever emulate someone else's style because it's not our own by nature. We can pick up pieces and tips and mantras,
Yes.
but finding our own authenticity, I think, is one of the real challenges of leadership because I can't ever be just like someone else and follow in their footsteps. And
I agree, and I can tell you, and I'm happy to admit it because I think this is me being authentic. I remember the first time I stepped into a role where my title said Chief Operating Officer, and back to imposter syndrome, right? I sit in my office, I'm like, can I really do this? Do I really know? And it takes some time. And a big piece of what I've learned though is I've learned my way. Right. And yes, I've done exactly what you said. I've worked for some really smart people. I've been fortunate to work with some really intelligent people in certain aspects. I've been taught how to be a good leader. So yes, you take those bits and pieces, but you have to put them together for you and then be comfortable being you. And that's the trick, right? And so trying to be Jack Welch was who I used to hear early in my career. Like nobody else is going to be that person. But what I've learned is how do I take the good that I've learned and I've seen and the positives and put that together with me. And now that's my authentic self. And that's what I'm comfortable showing up to work as every day. And then, yes, you adjust, you wear the cape, you do the things. But at the end of the day, your authentic self. People see that. And that's what generates credibility.
I love that. Well, thank you, Mike, so much. I think that the working title I had in my head was like Outside Eyes and Quick Wins. And I hope someday you write a book with that title or something about your playbook, because I think there really is so much gold that you've gathered in your many experiences that so many leaders could learn from, whether they're jumping into lots of organizations or really just doubling down on one. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights. If people would like to get a hold of you, what is the best way to do so?
I am easy to find on LinkedIn, Mike Drolet. There are not many of those out there. So LinkedIn, I'm easy to find. More than happy to engage. I view it as if, back to that, I've been fortunate to take tips and tricks and pieces along the way. If there's anything that I could offer that would help somebody, always more than happy to do that. And I appreciate the time and appreciate you inviting me to come participate.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And if you haven't been introduced to me and you're listening because you know Mike, If you have any interest in the tools that we use to make sure we've got the right people scientifically in the right seats, that morale is on track and we know exactly where the gaps are, I'd love to chat with you about that. My name's Melissa Ortiz. Yerxa is my maiden name. It's my middle name now. And so that's probably the easiest way to find me, because there are, unlike you, lots of Melissa Ortizes on LinkedIn, and my company is Activate Human Capital Group. So thanks again, Mike. And I hope to have you on another episode someday of You've Got People
Thank
Problems.
you very much.
You bet. Well, that's a wrap on this episode of You've Got People Problems. If you got something out of the conversation, make sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with the other leaders in your network, because let's face it, we all have people problems. You can watch full episodes on YouTube or listen on your favorite podcast app. But either way, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.